Good afternoon to those who have already joined us. It's still about 4 or 5 minutes till the hour, so we'll be getting started very soon.
Hi, folks. Can everyone see me, I hope? As Patricia mentioned, my name is Rosa Guzman Snyder, and I am the Director of Community Development here at NCFL. Fairly new to this role, but I'm very excited to share some nuggets of wisdom and hopefully practical tools that you all could use in your programs. Please feel free to ask questions throughout the presentation or throughout the webinar if you have any. And I'll do my best to make sure that we get those answered. So I think we're going to go ahead and kick off and get started. So just a quick overview about NCFL and what we do. We work with families and on family solutions to eradicate poverty across the country. So we truly believe that sometimes means or all the time it means taking a whole community approach and looking at the assets that communities have. And so hopefully we'll be able to kick this off and show some tools that we could be using in having these conversations with your participants that hopefully lead to community organizing or community advocacy. So real quickly, I'm just going to go through kind of a staple of NCFL, which is the family service learning model. We're obviously not going to get into each of these phases today, but we are going to focus on kind of setting up those conversations around community development and community organizing. And then we're going to dig a little deeper into investigation. How do we learn from community what those needs are and what they want to start taking action on? So we'll give family service learning is a tool for community development. So under each of these phases, hopefully we can put some more practical community organizing tools under each of those. So today we're just going to focus on investigation, but hopefully in the future we can try to get more of these off the ground. So a little bit about family service learning. Most of you all use these and use some form of family service learning in your programs. So it's really something led by your community, folks in your community that or in your programs that see certain needs, and they work collectively to come up with a solution to those issues that they see in community. And it should be integrated into the current programs that you have and should enhance curriculum and other educational opportunities. And this is a structured time for participants to reflect on their communities and reflect on those needs and assets in their communities. So if at any point, like I mentioned before, you all have questions, please feel free to use the question box to ask. So when we talk about family service learning, and we're going to be talking about how to have these conversations in community and how to lean into this space of community advocacy. What we really see is that family service learning usually leads to these conversations around community assets and community needs. It's inevitable, right? We see that once we start hearing from folks what they want, what they wish for their community, what they'd like to see, and what they'd like to see change, then this kind of opens up more conversations around power dynamics, around some of the challenges in their communities. And so really, we should take the opportunity in family service learning to lean into that space. The facilitator, whoever's facilitating family service learning, should really work on creating a space that allows for deeper reflection, that can allow for parents to see themselves as participants in the larger system and those key agents for creating change. So I'm going to share with you a quick example of how this might not always happen, how we might, as facilitators or as folks, staff at these programs, how we sometimes unintentionally kind of hinder those deeper reflection and those deeper conversations that we might have. So a couple weeks ago, I was in a community space, and this was in a faith-based space, and somebody was talking about how very fortunate they were to have a busing system in their community, that nowhere in their country or in any of their countries had they ever seen something so revolutionary that we would actually bus kids into schools. And so this person that was speaking about this was a community leader and was, I think, well-intentioned and really looking at helping families to see kind of the benefits of the school system here in the United States, but kind of the unintentional impact that has is that it doesn't really allow parents to ask deeper questions about, well, why are my kids being bused? Why don't we have a better school in our community? Like, why do I have to send my kid to another community? So it actually hinders, like when we talk about this and we talk about issues in our community, or we talk about certain services as being kind of like a fix-all solution to everyone's problems, we don't allow for that deeper reflection. So in this case, when we're talking about busing in this community, even though this man was talking from a well-intentioned space saying, hey, we're lucky to have busing, what about those parents that feel like, well, yeah, we're lucky to have busing, but I really wish my kids could stay in their community and go to school in this community? And then they're not really allowed to ask questions about why do my kids need to be bused? So I want you just to think about sometimes the way that we frame these conversations, the way that we talk about community issues sometimes hinders community to see larger concerns. Does anyone, I haven't seen any questions so far, but please feel free to ask any questions or send us a message if you all have any questions. So moving forward, how do we set up a space that allows for communities to think about larger issues? So one of the things that I see a lot is folks will do icebreakers that are very surface level. The community building activities that we should be doing should allow for deeper conversations. So I know, like, one of the things that I see a lot is like this bingo, like this person bingo, like find somebody that has the same birthday as you, find somebody that has the same, the same amount of kids as you, whatever. But those types of activities don't actually lead to like deep conversation that allows folks to open up. So I really love like this partnering up with one person. Even if you don't get to talk to everyone in the room, at least you have some sort of personal human connection with one or two other people. Some of the questions could be around like, name a time that you felt excluded from a space, or talk about a time that you received an unexpected gift from someone. These are all questions that lead to further reflection instead of like a quick, here, I just want to know if we have any similarities. So when you're leaning into that space of having these conversations about community organizing and community advocacy, make sure that you intentionally set up conversations that would lead to further discussion. And then also further reflection when we talk about power, when we talk about systems, or even systems of oppression, right? Like, allow for folks to feel comfortable talking about times where they have felt, again, excluded, when they have felt like there was a particular system that wasn't created for them. So in my previous world or previous life, I used to do, I was a community organizer in the space of language justice and immigration justice. And so it was really easy to have these conversations about how is the system not working for us? Like when we talk about going into a school that doesn't, or a clinic that doesn't offer interpretation, how does that make you feel? You know, what are the unintended or the impacts that has further on? And so it's really good to kind of set up that space to lead into further reflection about systems, power, oppression. And then also thinking about how these conversations actually lead to feelings of anxiety and despair. So ensuring that you create that container, create that space that would allow folks to like come in and out as they need to. So when you set up these community builders or community exercises, when you have conversations that lead to experiences around racism or oppression, just announce or just talk about, hey, be mindful of your body, be mindful of how you're feeling in this space. And if at any point you need to step out, it's okay to do that, right? We want folks to be comfortable and then still be challenged and still be stretched to a point where they can, you know, start moving towards action. But there's a lot of healing that is done through the space of conversation, through the space of reflection. So just be mindful of that, and then make sure that once folks have these conversations and then you're at a time, that you don't just let people go just like that. Use a closing circle, use a debrief session to talk about these issues, so that folks can kind of feel like they can close that up, and not completely. They're not ever going to be disconnected from the issues in their community, but at least they can close up the part of themselves that is talking about it in a real way, and can move into other areas of their life.
Rosa, I see that nobody's asked any questions at the moment, but if you wouldn't mind just to explain a little bit about what a closing circle looks like, I think that might be helpful for folks.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So some activities that can be done, obviously, if folks are familiar with the pedagogy of the oppressed, one of the big things that is talked about in that book is making sure that we learn in circles, right? And maybe not necessarily tables or like that traditional classroom style. So I know if that's the way that your space is set up, just intentionally create these circles around community. And then, you know, folks often have time to share like a one-word reflection right before they debrief, or right before you leave. That could be part of your debrief session. So just saying, or some other activities might be, might be around share something that is challenging and something that that is helping you grow in this particular moment, or something positive. And or I've heard the term like the rose and thorn, like share your rose and thorn. What was the rose of the session and what was the thorn? So those are all ways of debriefing the circle and really using that space in the circle to make sure that you can end the conversation and the reflection on a good note, and then move on to whatever's next. So one of the questions that we received is, how do we help participants feel empowered to work from within systems that they may not trust? So that's a great question from Mandy Phillips, and I think she's from Nebraska. Woo woo, Nebraska. So I think the big part of making folks feel empowered is helping them to understand what that system actually looks like. And I realize that systems are not trusted because they weren't created for these folks, right? When we talk about systems across the country, even our healthcare system, our justice system, our education system weren't necessarily created with the most vulnerable populations in mind. And so what we would have to do is helping them to see how they fit in this system. What is the role that they can take in this system to make sure that they could be active participants in that. And so some of the tools that you could use is definitely like power mapping or community asset mapping. So, and we can talk about power mapping. These are all tools that could be used. But power mapping is, okay, so in the system in the school system, who are the power brokers in the system? And then how do we get to those folks? What are the direct links between me as a parent and that person that is making that that decision? And so that often helps to see like that direct link and direct correlation as how community can start to impact change. And the other thing is, like, and we'll talk about this in the next couple slides, is starting with issues and not problems. So taking these smaller bites. When we see, if we try to tackle something like racism in the school system, that might not be the best approach. So what are some ways that racism is manifested, and then try to pick out these smaller bite campaigns that families can start taking a look at. And obviously we want them to have wins quickly, like those small wins quick, so that can help build their confidence as they move forward in community organizing. So another question is, what resources do you recommend for community or for building community across diverse cultures and belief systems? I.e. a group of parents representing 8 very different areas of the world. Okay, so some of those things I think would be, and I'll move back really quick. Understanding like what are some of those commonalities. So some of the areas, some of the things that I'm going to share a really quick tool that I love to use, which is mapping your journey. So if you all have these like large maps of the world that you can laminate, what is really cool is having parents come up with a dry erase marker or a vis-a-vis and mapping their life journey. And so what is really cool about that is they start learning about some of the similarities of why migration happens, right? Migration is natural. And so you start feeling a sense of solidarity with someone else that also migrated, maybe not from the same place or for the same reasons, or maybe for the same reasons, but not from the same place, and maybe has a different belief system than you. But at the end of the day, it comes down to, well, we migrated because we needed somewhere better to be, or we needed, I wanted to ensure a better future for my kids, or, I was escaping religious persecution, or I was escaping an oppressive system. And so it kind of helps folks kind of build a sense of solidarity around migration. So finding those things that are commonalities. Another community builder would be like talking about some of the hopes and dreams that you have for your children. And of course, like, you'll find that folks, almost everyone has very similar hopes and dreams for their children, right? And so these are some community builders that you can start using that can help folks feel comfortable and feel a sense of community. So I hope I answered that question, and I think I did, hopefully. So I'm going to move into, now that we talked about kind of setting that space and the importance of ensuring that you have relationships built before you move into this community organizing space. So I feel like that in itself, building community, ensuring that you're having those conversations and deeper reflection about power, oppression, systems, that in itself could take could take like a whole year, right? But hopefully you're working on that simultaneously with community organizing. And so another question is, what if they have limited English? So the quick answer to that is hopefully there is a system set up in your organization where you provide some sort of interpretation. But if you don't, there are other community builders that you can be using that use more nonverbal work. So I'm going to just point out activities from the Theater of the Oppressed, and you all could look the Theater of the Oppressed up, but a lot of those activities, those community builders, are built on nonverbal communication. So a lot of movement, a lot of opportunity for folks to look at each other in the eyes, and I realize that might even be an issue working across communities and across cultures, what nonverbal communication looks like. But I would refer you to the Theater of the Oppressed for more community builders that help lead into those conversations. All right, so we're going to move into this phase of investigation, right, in family service learning, and how we have these conversations about what are the issues that are most important to folks. I'm just going to check on the time, and I think we're good. What are the issues that are most important for folks in your community, and how do we start having these conversations? So one of my favorite tools that I have used in community organizing is like boiling it down to these 3 questions, which is, what do you love about your community or your school? What would you like to change about your community? And who else should we be talking to? The second question particularly, what would you like to change about your community? I always love to frame that with the magic wand question. Like, if you had a magic wand and you could change anything about your school or your community, what would that look like? So oftentimes, if you have this conversation with community members, they'll say very surface level things, which is okay. They'll say something like, "Oh, I wish that the street lights weren't broken. I would love to see street lights that work in my community," or "I'd love to see that my kids get better nutrition options during the lunch hour," or whatever. You'll find that you'll see surface level, but if you ask it with like this magic wand frame, it really allows folks to think more broadly about what they want to see in community. It helps them to think about, okay, what if I were to change my community, if I were to look at what my community needs, I would say, well, my community needs a rec center that is open until 9 o'clock, or my community needs opportunities for recreation, or my community needs, better connections with our neighbors. We need to know who to call or better navigation systems in terms of what are the resources in the community. So you'll start getting more broader answers that can lead us to like the bigger issues, like the root cause. And we'll talk about, hopefully we have enough time to talk about root cause analysis. But once this happens, once you start getting these answers from folks, like, what do you love about your community? What would you like to see changed? And who else from the community should we be talking to? What you'll find is that we'll move into this stage of pile sorting, or the sorting process. And so as a facilitator, what you would do is you would take these answers and put them on different colored cards. So the question about what you love about community can be, let's say, in a green card, and then the question about what you would love to see change could probably be, let's just say, in a purple card, right? And so that'll help us to start the sorting process. And let me just give you some examples of what that would look like. So these are some responses that maybe you would get from community members of the things that they love about their community, or the things that they would love to see changed, or what we'd call like the negative things, right? The things that they want to see changed. So some of the examples that I've heard in the past when I lead this activity is, oh, I love that I know my neighbors. I love that I know where my kids go to school. I love that I can walk anywhere. I love this feeling of belonging in my community. I love that I can go to the community clinic. One of the big ones is I love that it's affordable to live here, which I know in some major urban areas that's starting to change quite significantly. And then you'll start seeing some of the things that maybe community would want to see change. So, oh, the streetlights are broken, drugs are sold down the street, the playground is too old, the recreation center is too expensive, these sorts of things that they want to see, right? And so once you have these on cards, then you can move into the pile sorting stage. So I'm going to show you kind of what that would look like. You would put them in categories, right? You would look at climate and culture, you look at built environment. So, you know, is my neighborhood set up in such a way that is conducive to community walking down the street, or community feeling safe, or having a safe place to ride my bike or to walk, or whatever that means. So I've broken this down into some of these categories that you can look at pile sorting. So climate and culture, built environment, safety, the social service net or the schools, and economic development. These are just examples. This is definitely not comprehensive of an entire list that you would see. And then I have some other possible categories that you can sort through. So housing, income, jobs, community, education, environment, health, safety, and work-life balance. These are just, once you get the information from community, then you would lead them through this pile sorting process. What is cool about this is that your community members, your participants can get this information, can start gathering information from community just using these two simple questions, right? Like, what do I love and what would I love to see changed? Okay, I'm going to get a couple questions. Are we able to revisit the webinar at a later time and use a slide for reference? Yes, absolutely. And any other questions? Does anybody have questions about pile sorting and what that process looks like? And maybe does this seem like something that you could use in kind of leading conversations with your community members or your participants? And I'll give us just a minute if anyone has a question. How do the participants learn what others named on their cards? So that would be the pile sorting process. So even though the facilitator is leading that process, you would do it with your community. You would do it with the participants as part of family service learning. So once you gather all those cards, you would lead them through sorting. Like, okay, what is in the environment? What is in the health pile? What is in the education pile? What is in the community service pile? So you would kind of walk them through it. I hope that makes sense. So you essentially review all the cards with all of your participants. And so one of the things that we're starting to do here in Louisville is we're asking parents from this parent advisory committee to ask 5 other parents. So we'll have a tool that'll say, here are the 2 questions, and then like gather information from 5 other community members, and then bring it back, and then we'll do the pile sorting process then. Okay, what structures do we need to have in place to be ready to start pile sorting so that we're not asking questions that we aren't ready to address? So I think the big questions are, I guess I need clarification, like what sort of questions wouldn't you be ready to address? Like if it were, because at this point in the process of the pile sorting process, you're not actually tackling fixing the problem, you're just working on identifying the problem. And so even if you're not ready to address the problem, I think it's still fair to make sure that we that you identify that it's a problem in the community, and then we'll do deeper reflection on what that means, and even doing some root cause analysis of why that happens in community. So yeah, even if the problem isn't something that you're ready to address, I think it's still very important that community knows that it exists. So a good thing to do is even just put it up on a wall, like making sure that you put all the cards kind of under each of the sorting categories. All right, cool. We're gonna move on to the next thing. It's not moving, sorry. Which is once we have this pile sorting process, we look at root cause analysis, and we look at the deeper issues behind these problems that community address. So one of the easiest ways that I think about root cause analysis is just asking myself the why question. Some people say 5 times, other people say it's 7 times. Sometimes you come to the root cause at 5 times, other times you have to keep asking yourself why. So this is a good way of making sure that a community has an opportunity to look at the entire problem solving process, and then look at their what they see as the solutions. So I'm going to walk us through a quick example of this. If one of the problems that you see, one of the issues that come up in your community, and this is something that happens in a lot of low-income communities, is folks say, oh, childhood obesity is one of the issues. So then you would talk about what are some of the reasons why childhood obesity is an issue. So, there's a lack of recreational opportunities. There's some cultural and family beliefs around weight. Maybe there's marketing and messaging of unhealthy foods, or even lack of marketing and messaging of healthy foods, and then access to healthy foods. And then somebody talked about, is this equivalent to the research phase of the organizing cycle, meeting the experts to cut the issue? Yeah, we're actually going to talk about cutting the issue in just a few minutes, Billy, but thank you for asking that. So once we find out what are some of the reasons why folks, why we've identified childhood obesity as one of the issues, then we pick one of these reasons why. So we're going to say access to healthy food. Let's just pick that for an example. So let's look at access to healthy food. Well, why is that happening here? Why is it? Why don't we have access to healthy foods? Well, there aren't grocery stores at a walking distance. Well, why does that happen? Big chain stores don't always want to be in low-income communities. Why? Stores don't make a high enough profit in low-income communities. And then it kind of brings us to that question of, well, why? Why is our community a low-income community? And then you could talk about, well, city planners' policies assign certain neighborhoods to be for people of color or low-income folks. So it kind of brings us down to that root cause, right? Like, what are some of the reasons why? And so when you have this, you can essentially make a campaign out of each of these issues. You can make, and the easiest would be, the lack of grocery stores within walking distance, or why the grocery stores within walking distance aren't selling healthy food. You can make a whole campaign out of that with your parents. Like, maybe there's an initiative to bring healthy fruits and vegetables to corner stores in your neighborhood. There's an initiative like that in the Denver community where, it was considered a food desert, and so some of the action that was done about it is that some of the larger chain stores started bringing in fresh fruits and vegetables to 7-Elevens and charge a decent price. I know sometimes 7-Eleven will charge you $4 for a banana, but this was some of the initiatives that community started taking on. And then we can go even deeper, like, why don't big chain stores come to our community? And how do we meet city policy and the historical oppression that occurred and why food deserts are the way they are. How do we meet that? How do we marry that with the fact that big chain stores don't want to come to our community? So I've seen some initiatives also where community says, hey, city, such and such city, help us subsidize this store to come into our community, like making a real push for that. So I have a question here that says, yet there is public health research that does target communities that are low income or have food deserts. So yeah, that's absolutely true. That so I'm actually a little bit unclear about the question, but I know that there are low income, or there are stores that actually will go into low income neighborhoods, but oftentimes you see those places overcharging or maybe not providing the most quality products. So yeah, I think there's a lot to be done in taking each of these issues and creating campaigns around it, and then how do you get to the root cause? So I'm going to stop here really quick. If anybody has any questions, I think we're moving through this very quickly. It's only 2:35 and we're almost finished. So that is like one of the tools that we can be using, right? When we talk about root cause analysis, we can look at that as a tool of looking at the whys, like and taking each of those whys and helping our community, or helping those participants to create campaigns around that. So we're going to move into another tool that we can use, which is identifying the problem and the issue. Like, what is a problem and what is the issue? So this will oftentimes happen when we talk to community about some of the issues that they see or some of the problems that they see, and they'll say like really large things like, oh, pollution is an issue, or crime is an issue, or racism is an issue, or racism is a problem in our community. And I'm sorry, I'm using these two words interchangeably, and I shouldn't be, because they're very specific. So the problem is like these big things that we need to tackle. Like, what is it going to take, or what are the big issues in community? So obviously, when we talk about pollution, we talk about environmental racism, we talk about crime, we talk about police relations. Like, what does that all mean? And then, so these are the bigger things. And then the issue is the specific challenge that is part of the larger problem. So for example, the problem is we have low academic achievement in our local elementary schools. And the issue, like some of the, like cutting the issue, well, it's because students are missing more than 14 days in the school year, leading to poor academic outcomes. So it's looking at the problem overall and some of the individual issues that kind of contribute to that problem. So I'm just going to take a big one, and this is a huge one, so I'll just bear with me for a second. So when we talk about, if your community will say, well, racism is an issue in my community. Okay, what specific things about racism do you see manifested in your community? So some of these would be like, there's economic disparities, you see a wage gap between communities of color and other communities, or white communities. You know, there's a disproportionate representation of people of color in the justice system. There's a lack of language access. And so essentially, like, you would fill in what are those other issues around racism that contribute to a larger systemic problem that we call racism. And so this is where, again, your community would have the opportunity to cut the issue. They would have the opportunity to say, racism is a problem. Now we have these individual things that we would want to tackle and that we want to create campaigns out of. And then out of each of these things, so I'll just take language access, for example. You know, what are the individual areas where language access isn't made available? So is it clinics? Is it schools? And then how do we create strategy around advocating for language access? So I know that the problem oftentimes seems so big, but we want to make sure that we're giving community they're not small wins. I know we want to say these are small wins, but they're not. They're part of a larger systemic issue. But man, if we could tackle language access as part of a larger systemic issue of racism, I mean, that's a huge win, right? Like if we can even tackle language access in our schools or in our health clinics, that's a huge win. And so I don't want to minimize these smaller issues and cutting the issue, but I do think that it allows community to have a sense of like not a quick win, but a win. Like it doesn't feel so overwhelming at times. So I'm going to stop for a second and ask if anyone has any questions or comments, or even if they want to share some examples. And I can even unmute. Can I unmute community if they want to share something? So I kind of want to hear from community, what are some, from folks out in the field, what are some of the what are some of the issues that your community has tackled, and have you used any of these strategies? So I think a couple of folks, if you want to speak up, if you want to share, I'd love to hear from folks. Is it Clifford?
Clifford, it looks like Clifford Jackson, it looks like your hand is up. I guess if you don't mind to lower it, if you do want to talk, then I'll unmute you. Okay, you have the floor. Clifford, or if you are sharing, we are not able to hear you.
Oh, okay. I don't have a microphone. Okay. You're welcome to type something up if you want us to share it. I'm going to go down and see if anyone has. Does anybody else want to share a little bit about what their community has done or some of the issues that you've taken on? No, let me see. Everyone's so quiet.
It looks like they are very quiet. I'm not going to move into the webcam space, but while we're giving people time to kind of think, sometimes it is helpful just to hear things that go on at other programs. So one that I think really shows kind of the power of what Rosa's really been talking about today, and you've done a really good job of that, Rosa, like looking at how to put that investigation step in really squarely in the hands of the participants and the parents. That's so important when we're thinking about a deeper implementation of family service learning, because that's really where the big value comes in, and the kind of the payoff for families, that they're able to develop projects that address what they really care about. And so we saw this happen last school year with our Toyota Family Learning Program in Las Vegas at the Public Education Foundation. So the school, as parents kind of in a structured environment, they are kind of led through this, let's think about what we really want to work on for a project. And so as they had the opportunity to really dig in and think about that, the principal of one of their schools spoke with the parents and was explaining that they were very near to the state taking over their school, and that piece of information was really important for parents to kind of dig in and to think about, how do we address this? Why is this going on? And how can we show the state that that's not what is our desire? And so it did really kind of go from that big idea to looking at, what is the specific issue here? Why is it that the state's wanting to take over the school? And ultimately, those families were successful in avoiding the state taking over the school, which that was their goal, which was pretty amazing. So so that did give people an opportunity to share some of their questions as well.
So I'm just going to share. Thank you, Patricia. That's like I feel like that's a great example of community taking action and like having their voice heard in some of these larger systems. So Clifford Jackson said the state of Florida is focusing on dads and male role models to become more engaged in their child education through a statewide initiative of Take Your Child to School Day, or Dads Take Your Child to School Day. Okay, that sounds like a great initiative. Somebody else said, my question is, what does community look like in these structures? Yes, they are systemic, but can you talk to the barriers that sometimes is created when you have too many experts that do not take into account a community member's experience and how that shifts paradigms that are developed to help, not hinder more? So that's a great question, and it's from Cesar Sanchez. Cesar, I feel like it is true. I feel like as a whole, these systems are not prepared, and I'm talking system-wide, not individually. Systems are not prepared to hear the voices of marginalized communities. And I feel like that's work that needs to be done on a grass tops end. That's work that needs to occur with foundations. That's work that needs to occur with folks in political power, because oftentimes, so I'll share an example. You have a public meeting in a community about zoning changes, right? They're changing some of the zoning that will allow for buildings to go higher up and build more condos or townhomes, and that might lead to the eventual displacement or gentrification of a neighborhood. So you'll have a community meeting, and so the city will come in and they'll check it. It's like a checklist, right? They're like, okay, we need community input, so I'm going to check this off my list and make sure that we show up to a space and that we frame things in such a way that will get everyone's thumbs up, that everybody will say, yeah, go ahead and do this. So I think that our job in those situations, when these community forums are being formed or being held, our job as facilitators or in our job as these leaders in community that are kind of helping lead our participants into this community organizing space, our job is to ask the hard questions for now. Our job is to do that research ahead of time and prepare our community and present all of the things that might happen and all of the research. So I know that's an additional burden for folks like us that are already, working long hours or already have a lot of work to do. But I feel like for now, until we get our community to a space where they are, until they're actively looking at when city planning meetings are, when city council is holding their meetings or their hearings, that is our space for now. We are having to kind of take on that role and make sure we ask the hard questions ahead of time and prep our community to ask those hard questions. So here's where it comes down to, says that even if they don't listen, even if they go back and still build that high rise, I feel like at least it's documented to say, hey, our community spoke up at this forum and you didn't listen. All that's going to do is create more power and, in a sense, more frustration to build some power around a certain issue. So that the next time you go to city council, maybe you have more folks there. There is power in numbers. And so maybe you have more folks there saying, hey, you know what? The last time our community spoke up and you didn't listen. So now we have twice the amount of people and this is what we're asking for. And I hope that answers your question, Cesar. So thanks, Patricia. This is Blair. To finish the conversation about Las Vegas, the principal attributes the move from a one-star school to a two-star school to the work of the parents. This was not simply about getting the community signatures, but also because schools are rated on the engagement of families in the school. So thanks for sharing that. Mandy, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you if that's okay, if you feel comfortable with that, so that you can share a little bit about your experience in, let me see, in family service learning. Is that okay? And even if it's not, just because I know you, I'm going to kind of put you on the spot. Sorry. Where is Mandy? All right, Mandy, you're on. Can you, we can't hear you, Mandy. Uh-oh, I think we can't hear you. I don't think your mic is on. Do you want to check your mic, and then maybe we'll try to come back. So another comment from Blair, also these kinds of substantive projects can allow marginalized parents a space to engage with power brokers with whom they don't customarily engage with. For example, at the Las Vegas school, parents who were not native speakers of English and had not graduated from high school had the opportunity to work with city engineers to determine and plan for a crosswalk near a school that had a lot of foot traffic, children to school. Yeah, that's a great example. And I think that one of the biggest roles that we have as practitioners in this space is changing the narrative around how we talk about parents and how we talk about their leadership. So I often will say, you know, we expect parents to have X, Y, Z before they're able to participate in this democratic process, before we deem their leadership valuable. And we need to get away from that mindset. We don't need parents to learn English before they're able to get their voice heard. We deem their leadership now, we validate their leadership now, and we listen, they have a voice now, even if they don't have, even if they're in our programs and they're making these attempts to grow in whether that be in language or in their education level or anything. As practitioners, our job is to validate their leadership currently, not when they do this or when they graduate from our programs. So they have a voice now. So Cesar said there are examples where community participation that comes under scrutiny, even from progressive voices. In Chicago, participatory budgeting in wards for 1 million Chicago local city councils. The issue is the use of key community leaders that end up dividing and driving into a narrow perspective. Family learning is participatory. We have to unlearn current structures of capacity building. Just a thought. Thank you. Yes, absolutely. And again, it comes down to we feel like we need to change the parent before they're able to participate. When in fact, when I mentioned this before, there is a very special role of foundations and key political leaders that are in this space. They have the role of changing the narrative around community leaders, community leadership, because it doesn't just need it. The onus should not just be on community leaders. It should also be on those folks that are listening to the voices of community. Mandy, I'm going to try again. Maybe let's see if your mic is on now. Are you talking? No. Okay, I'm just going to read. Patricia, do you want to read this really quick?
Sure.
So I'm going to read what Mandy wrote really quick. So my middle school ESL students.
You want me to read it?
Yeah, is that okay?
Sure. So Mandy shared, my middle school ESL students felt that they were misunderstood by teachers and their community. People think I'm good at math because I'm Asian, but it's really because I work hard. People think I'm Mexican, but I'm actually Puerto Rican. This is what I want them to understand about me. They created presentations about their personal experiences that they delivered to an audience at our local university and also to the teachers in our middle school. It was a huge step in breaking down barriers in the school and community and was really empowering for the kids.
Yeah, that's a great example. Mandy, thank you for sharing about how you look at an issue, your middle schoolers are able to look at an issue and find a solution for it, right? This is from Billy. I was recently told by elected student council leaders, parents, that I should email the school executive director because I have more power and it would be easier for me to do. So they are all yellow. They ultimately emailed her, but I would like to hear how you would have responded. So I think I would have wanted to know how this executive director had responded to parents in the past. Has this executive director been receptive to parent voice, or has this person traditionally shrugged parents off as no big deal? To me, that would have been the bigger question. They're super receptive and accessible. Then absolutely, I would have said, hey, parents, this is you have earned your right to a voice. This email needs to come from you. If you need backup, I'm definitely happy to help. But that email, if it's something, if this ED has been receptive to them in the past, and they have a relationship, absolutely, it should have come from the parents, right? And then just offer that support. If there's anything, if I need to follow up, I'm happy to do that, but the initiation should really be with the parents. That's a great question, Billy. Anybody else? I think we have a few more minutes left, so any comments or questions? I really hope this was helpful to folks. Hopefully it provided some practical tools or a guide for you all to use in just this investigation phase, right? It's not the whole process of family service learning, but really investigating, learning from community, having parents take that role in having those conversations with community, and learning how to do that pile sorting process and the root cause analysis, or if you choose to do the problem versus the issue, those are different strategies that you can use in your groups. So I think I know we just said questions or reflections. If anyone has anything else, this is my email address. I would love to hear more about the way your communities are mobilizing around certain issues. I'd love to hear more stories about that. NCFL is always here to support in any way. So we believe that family learning is so closely related to this space of community organizing, right? Once parents have a space to feel and to be validated as humans, and to feel and be validated as leaders, I feel like it's just a natural launching pad into community organizing, if that's what they choose. So I'd love to hear more stories from folks, or if you all have any additional questions, always up to chat. So please email me if you have anything else, and I think I'll just leave it up for one more minute if anyone has any more questions or any comments. Then we will close this out. I hope everyone has a great weekend. Happy Friday to everyone. And I hope everyone takes care of themselves and does something that is rejuvenating, relaxing. All right, folks, I'm going to close this up. Have a great weekend.